The SEAL commander had spent half his life surrounded by weapons. He'd seen rifles handled by nervous recruits with shaking hands and by veterans who made every motion look effortless. But the way Sarah Cole cleaned the Barrett .50 was different. It wasn't just efficient. It was ritualistic, almost reverent. Each movement carried intention. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate. She slid the cleaning rod through the barrel with the steadiness of someone who had done it thousands of times, yet treated every repetition like it was the first. The fluorescent lights above the armory flickered faintly, casting pale shadows across the steel racks. Around her, other operators moved with loud familiarity magazines clattered onto tables. Laughter erupted in short bursts. Arguments rose and fell about gear or tactics, but her corner remained a bubble of silence. Even. The air seemed different around her, tense but controlled. Soldiers glanced her way, quick and furtive, never for long. They respected her presence, but avoided staring too openly, as though her quiet focus exposed something about themselves. The commander stood a few paces away, pretending to double-check inventory sheets, though his eyes kept drifting back. He told himself he'd seen everything: seasoned Rangers, Marine Force Recon, Delta operators who'd forgotten more about killing than most would ever learn. Yet Sarah unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. It wasn't fear. It wasn't intimidation. It was curiosity laced with unease. She didn't carry herself like someone seeking validation, nor did she seem burdened by insecurity. She was simply complete, like a rifle in her hands. She paused, holding the Barrett's massive bolt in her gloved hand, examining it under the sterile glow. The weapon was heavy, unwieldy to most, but in her grip it looked natural, balanced. She adjusted her cloth and began wiping carbon residue from the grooves with surgical precision. The commander had been trained to read people. Body language. Told stories before mouths did. Most shooters cleaning a rifle this size carried subtle signs of strain tightening in the shoulders, tension in the wrists, small grimaces when weight shifted. Sarah showed none of it. Every muscle in her body worked in harmony. No excess, no falter. He thought of the Barrett itself, a weapon designed for destruction at impossible distances. It wasn't a rifle you gave to just anyone. It was a tool that magnified skill or exposed lack of it. And yet, in her hands, it seemed less like an instrument of war and more like an extension of her will. The commander finally broke the silence. You treat that rifle like it's a Stradivarius. Her eyes flicked toward him briefly, calm, assessing. It deserves it, she replied, her voice low but steady. Every part has a memory. If you don't respect it, it won't respect you when you need it most. He raised an eyebrow. He'd heard men wax poetic about their weapons before, but this was different. There was no bravado in her words, no romanticizing. Just conviction, spoken like a fact learned the hard way. You talk like it's alive, he said. Her hands didn't stop moving. She slid the bolt back into place with a soft click. Alive? No, but it decides. A millimeter off, a fraction of wind ignored, and someone dies. That makes it worth listening to. The commander studied her, but she offered nothing more. He almost pressed further, but something in her tone suggested walls not easily breached. Behind them, two younger operators argued over optics, their voices carrying. One of them, Rodriguez, barely 22, noticed the exchange and smirked. Careful, Commander, he said, half joking. She outshoot you blindfolded. The room chuckled. Sarah gave no reaction. She snapped the Barrett's case shut, locked it with 2 clicks, and rose to her feet. She moved past them with the same deliberate calm she'd shown while cleaning, not acknowledging the teasing, not needing to. And as she left the armory, the room seemed to exhale collectively, like a storm had passed without ever breaking. The commander remained, his eyes lingering on the door she'd just walked through. He wasn't easily impressed. Too many years, too many missions had stripped him of illusions. But something about Sarah gnawed at him. He wanted to know more, not just her skill, but her story, where she had learned to carry silence like armor. Later that night, over lukewarm coffee in the operations tent, he found himself asking about her casually. He didn't need to. The men volunteered details unprompted, voices dropping like they were trading secrets. "She's not military," one said. "She doesn't have to be," another replied. "Word is, she's contracted after a record. Some insane distance, like 3 clicks out." The commander pretended not to react, though his grip on the mug tightened. 3 clicks. Nearly 2 miles. He knew the physics of such a shot. Wind drift, bullet drop, Coriolis effect. At that distance, probability replaced certainty. A rifle could send a round that far, sure, but hitting a human target? That was beyond rare. That was myth. He thought back to the armory, the steadiness in her hands, the absence of wasted movement. Maybe it wasn't myth. Maybe it was exactly what it looked like, discipline honed past the point of human error. Still, he stayed quiet. Rumors had their own life in units like this, and most died in the light of truth. But he couldn't shake the image of her bent over the Barrett, cleaning it with the same devotion monks gave prayer. The next day, during pre-mission checks, he found himself watching her again. She adjusted her scope with tiny, deliberate clicks, her eye pressed firmly against the glass. Operators around her loaded magazines, tightened straps, joked to ease nerves. Sarah didn't join. She existed in her own orbit, a still point in the chaos. The commander realized then what unsettled him most. She wasn't trying to fit into their world, nor was she resisting it. She simply moved parallel to it, detached yet indispensable. Like the rifle itself, she was heavy, precise, designed for a purpose few could shoulder. He told himself it didn't matter. What mattered was the mission. What mattered was trust, earned in blood and fire, not in whispers about distances. And yet, as the transport's engines roared to life, he couldn't help but think of the number, hanging in the air between them, unspoken. 3,267 meters. If it were true, then the quiet woman cleaning her rifle in silence wasn't just part of his team. She was history, and history had a way of changing everything. Her name was Sarah Cole, though even that felt incomplete, like a placeholder rather than a full identity. To the SEAL commander, names were usually anchors, tying soldiers to families, to pasts, to histories written in service records. Sarah's name, however, floated in a kind of suspended silence. When he'd scanned her personnel file, it had looked less like a biography and more like a puzzle deliberately missing pieces. Lines of black ink blocked entire sections' previous assignments. Redacted, deployments classified, commendations withheld under the pretense of national security. He'd handled sensitive files before, but rarely did they hide so much. What remained was skeletal. Born in Montana, enlisted briefly in the Army, separated under circumstances, administratively resolved. No dishonorable mention, no commendations. Carried forward. Then a gap, several years long, followed by a reappearance in contractor circles. From there, she drifted across hot zone Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, attached not to one unit, but several, never for long. It was the kind of resume that raised more questions than it answered. In person, she was even harder to read. Sarah spoke little, often responding with curt acknowledgments, but her silence carried no awkwardness. Some people went quiet out of discomfort or insecurity. Sarah's quiet was intentional, the silence of someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to hide, except perhaps everything. The commander observed how others interacted with her. Most operators approached with cautious respect, but never familiarity. In close quarters teams, bonds usually formed fast banter, inside jokes, light hazing. Sarah bypassed that rhythm entirely, yet no one seemed to resent her for it. If anything, the lack of camaraderie was replaced by a kind of reverence. During downtime, chatter circled back to her like moths around a flame. Men who had fought in Fallujah and Helmand, men with confirmed kills and scars that mapped their histories, still found themselves whispering about Sarah Cole. "She's got a kill record," one operator murmured over chow. "Swear to God. Took a guy down at 3,000 meters. "Bullshit," another replied, though without conviction. "That's video game nonsense." "No, man. It's in the Canadians' range. McMillan TAC 50, right?" But hers was with the Barrett. Different beast entirely. The commander listened, never joining in. He had no interest in myths. He'd seen too many stories spun from half-truths, designed to inflate egos or reputations. But the way Sarah carried herself unsettled him. She didn't fit the profile of someone who basked in legend. In fact, she seemed almost allergic to attention. One evening, he found her at the firing range, alone. She'd set up the Barrett on a bipod, sandbags supporting its massive weight. Through night vision, he watched her go through drills loading, chambering, breathing, firing. The recoil thundered through the night, but she absorbed it with steady posture, cycling the bolt fluidly before returning to her scope. He noticed something then. Many shooters rushed their breathing, pulling the trigger between shallow inhales. Sarah didn't. She moved with her breath, slow and deep, as if aligning her body to invisible rhythms. Each shot rang like punctuation at the end of a thought, precise and deliberate. She wasn't practicing. She was communing. When she finally noticed him, she didn't seem startled. She simply lifted her head from the scope and asked, "You need the range?" He shook his head, just watching. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion but calculation. "Most don't watch. They try to measure." "Am I measuring?" he asked. "You're assessing," she corrected. "There's a difference." He had no reply, and she returned to her weapon. Later, back in his quarters, he reviewed more files. He shouldn't have cared contractors came and went. But Sarah's presence felt different. She wasn't simply attached to his unit. She was woven into its fabric, shaping it without trying. The whispers, the stolen glances, the way her silence anchored rooms, it was influence without effort. A commander wondered what kind of past carved a person like that. He knew soldiers, broken by tours, others hardened into bitterness or arrogance. Sarah carried neither. She was composed, balanced, like tempered steel. But tempered steel only came from fire. At breakfast, one of his senior operators leaned in quietly. "Sir, you know about her, right?" The commander set down his coffee. "Know what?" "She's the one. Kandahar, 2017. That shot." He didn't respond, though his jaw tightened. The rumor was resurfacing again. He dismissed it outwardly, but inside, something shifted. Kandahar wasn't myth, it was blood-soaked reality. He'd lost men there, knew the terrain, the impossible winds, the distances that turned rifles into prayers. If she had made that shot, it wasn't luck. It was mastery bordering on obsession. And yet, she'd never spoken of it. As the day wore on, he found himself watching her interact with the younger operators. They gravitated toward her, not because she was friendly, but because her silence drew them. They asked her about scopes, about wind calls, about angles. She answered with precision, no wasted words. She broke down calculations like recipes, teaching them to see the battlefield in terms of mathematics and patience. Distance doesn't forgive arrogance, she told one. You don't beat the wind. You learn to live with it. The commander noted the way her students listened, rapt. Men who'd normally roll their eyes at lectures leaned in, absorbing every syllable. She wasn't just instructing. She was reshaping their mindset. That night, lying awake in his bunk, the commander admitted something to himself. He wasn't curious anymore. He was compelled. Sarah Cole was more than a contractor with a rifle. She was a mystery threaded through whispers and shadows. And somewhere in that silence, he sensed, lay a story that could change everything he thought he knew about distance, precision, and the thin line between myth and reality. For now, though, he let the silence remain, because sometimes silence told more than words ever could. The chow hall buzzed with its usual low-hung trays clattering, boots scuffing against concrete, voices mixing in fragments of jokes and complaints. The commander sat at the far end, half listening to the chatter, half buried in his own thoughts. But tonight, one conversation pulled his attention like a magnet. "She's the one with the record," a young SEAL whispered, leaning close to his buddy. His tone carried that blend of awe and disbelief soldiers used when sharing something larger than life. 3,200-something meters. Confirmed. His friend frowned, shaking his head. "That's ridiculous." "You're talking." 2 miles. At that range, a bullet drifts feet, not inches. "No, I'm serious," the younger one insisted. "I heard it from a guy who rotated out of Afghanistan. Sai she dropped a high-value target, 1 shot, clean." The commander didn't interject, but he felt the words settle into him like a stone in water. Rumors had weight when repeated with conviction. He forced his focus back to his tray, chewing slowly. But the whispers trailed after him, even as he left the hall, like shadows he couldn't shake. That evening, he found Sarah in the equipment bay. She was alone, tightening straps on her gear, her movements methodical. A fluorescent light washed pale against her face, making her look carved from stone. "You ever get tired of the whispers?" the commander asked, stepping inside. She looked up, expression unreadable. "What whispers?" "The ones about records, distances, impossible shots." Her eyes lingered on him, a moment longer than necessary. Then she returned to the strap, pulling it snug. "Soldiers tell stories. Helps them sleep. Some stories," he said, "are based on truth. Some," she replied evenly, "are based on need." He studied her, trying to read the spaces between her words. Most people gave themselves away with too much talk. Sarah revealed nothing by refusing to play. "I've been in this business a long time," he said. "I know the difference between exaggeration and respect. They don't tell stories about you to impress each other. They tell them because they believe them." She didn't answer, didn't rise to his bait. Instead, she buckled the last strap, tested it with a firm tug, and set the gear aside. "You're asking questions," she said finally. "Why?" "Because I need to know who's covering my men's backs," he replied. His tone was sharper than intended. Her gaze didn't waver. "Then watch me work. That'll tell you more than whispers ever could." The commander wanted to push, to demand clarity, but something in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't arrogance. It was a boundary firm, uncheckable. Crossing it now would yield nothing. So he nodded once and left, his questions unanswered but not forgotten. Later that night, the base quieted. Generators hummed in the distance, wind brushing sand against corrugated metal walls. The commander lay in his cot, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words, "Watch me work." Sleep came in fragments, broken by memories of Afghanistan. He saw the dust, the endless horizon, the fragile line between order and chaos. He remembered the countless firefights where distance meant survival or death. He remembered men who never returned, lives undone by seconds and inches. And he wondered what kind of person could look through a scope, calculate the impossible, and deliver death with surgical certainty. The next day, he caught Sarah outside the range. She was instructing two younger operators, both clearly eager to absorb whatever she offered. She spoke with the same calm cadence as always, breaking complex equations into simple truths. "You can't think about hitting the target," she told them. "You think about eliminating every reason you might miss. The wind, the humidity, the slope, even the rotation of the earth. Eliminate the doubt, and the bullet does its job." One of the young SEALs frowned, scribbling notes. "But at extreme distances, isn't it luck?" Sarah shook her head. "Luck is for gamblers. A shot is either earned or it isn't. You control what you can. You accept what you can't. That's not luck. That's discipline." The commander watched from a distance, noting the way the operators leaned in, absorbing every word. Sarah wasn't charismatic in the traditional sense. She didn't raise her voice, didn't dramatize. Her authority came from precision, both in language and in presence. When the session ended, the two younger men thanked her quietly and moved on. Sarah packed her rifle with practiced ease, her motions fluid. The commander stepped closer. "That thing you said about eliminating doubt, that's not something most people figure out on their own." She glanced at him, unimpressed. "Experience teaches faster than books." "Afghanistan?" he asked. For the first time, her eyes shifted just slightly, not evasive, haunted. "Afghanistan," she repeated softly, like the word itself carried weight. "What happened there?" he pressed. She snapped the rifle case shut, the metallic click echoing between them. "Enough," she said. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it closed the door firmly. He nodded, though inside his curiosity burned hotter. He'd seen that look before, the one soldiers carried, when memory wasn't just painful, but defining. Afghanistan had carved something into her, something deeper than scars. That night, he sat alone with a laptop, pulling up encrypted archives. His clearance opened doors others couldn't, but even so, the files he found were sparse. Kandahar Province, 2017. A single line buried in mission logs. Confirmed neutralization. Distance, 3,267 meters. His pulse quickened. It was there. Official, not rumor, not myth. History. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. 2 miles. A shot that defied probability. A feat etched not in legend, but in military record. And it belonged to the quiet woman who carried herself like silence was her armor. He closed the laptop, sat in the dim light of his quarters, and thought about what it meant. Sarah Cole wasn't just part of his team. She was something rarer, something that made even the most hardened soldiers whisper. And now he understood why. The commander had learned long ago that files never told the whole story. Reports reduced human experience into lines of text, dates, distances, outcomes. They stripped away the grit, the hesitation, the sweat dripping into a scope, the heartbeat pounding against a rifle's stock. But even redacted ink couldn't erase the record he found buried deep in the system. Kandahar Province, 2017. Confirmed target neutralized. Distance, 3,267 meters. The words stared back at him, sterile yet heavy. 3,267 meters, almost 2 miles. A range so absurd it bordered on fiction, and yet there it was, stamped with the cold authority of official confirmation. The commander sat back in his chair, rubbing a hand across his jaw. He'd been in firefights, where 100 meters felt like eternity. He'd seen men miss at 50, panic in close quarters, fire blindly into chaos. But this was science bending toward art, probability conquered by skill. He shut the laptop, but the thought clung to him like desert dust. Sarah Cole had done what few even dared to attempt. And she carried it without mention, without pride, without even a trace of the weight most would flaunt this legend. The next morning, he spotted her again in the armory. She was bent over the Barrett, adjusting her scope with small, deliberate clicks. Around her, the room carried the usual pre-mission energy operators' running checks. Voices raised in half-jokes, nerves disguised as bravado. But Sarah moved as if untouched by it all, steady in her own rhythm. He approached, leaning against the steel rack beside her. "Kandahar?" he said quietly. Her hands stilled. The faintest flicker crossed her face, gone in an instant. "What? About it?" 3,267 meters, he said. Her eyes met his, calm, unreadable. "You've been digging." "I had to," he admitted. "I'm responsible for these men. If someone's covering them, I need to know exactly who I'm trusting." She studied him for a long moment, then returned her attention to the rifle. "And now you know." "That's it?" he asked. "You hold a record that most snipers wouldn't even believe possible, and all you can say is now you know?" She slid the scope forward, tested the eye relief, and adjusted the mount. "What else is there to say? I did my job. I walked away. That's all." The commander shook his head. "No, that's not all. That shot should have been impossible." Sarah didn't look up. "It wasn't." Her voice was flat, but he heard something underneath it, something quiet, like a scar hidden beneath layers. He wondered what it had cost her to make that shot. Distance was one thing. Certainty was another. At 2 miles, you weren't just pulling a trigger. You were gambling with the wind, with time itself. "You saved lives," he said. She locked the scope into place with a click. "Or I ended one. Depends on how you count." He didn't respond. There was no arrogance in her tone, no pride, just truth, stripped to its sharpest edge. She didn't glorify what she'd done, and she didn't diminish it either. It simply was. A commander realized then that the record wasn't what defined her. What defined her was the silence with which she carried it. Most would have let it become their identity. Sarah had buried it, letting only the whispers remain. Later, during the mission briefing, he kept stealing glances at her across the table. The SEALs leaned forward, eyes scanning maps and satellite images, marking entry points and fallback routes. Sarah sat slightly apart, her Barrett's case resting by her chair, her gaze fixed on the terrain photos. She didn't speak often, but when she did, her words cut through the noise. "That ridge line," she said, pointing to the southern approach. "It funnels wind from the valley. Anyone shooting from there will have to fight cross-drift. Take the northern slope instead. It gives clearer sight lines." The commander watched as the team shifted their plan instantly, no hesitation. Her authority didn't need rank. It was born from certainty. That night, as they prepared gear for deployment, he approached her again. "Do you ever think about it?" "What?" she asked. "Kandahar. That shot." She closed the Barrett's case, the latches snapping shut. "Every day." The simplicity of her answer stopped him. She didn't elaborate, didn't offer details, but the weight in her voice said enough. The shot wasn't a trophy. It was a shadow. It followed her, whether she acknowledged it or not. The commander nodded slowly. "You know, most people would have written books by now, given speeches, lived off the legend. I'm not most people," she said. He almost smiled at that. It was the first time he'd heard her brush against humor, though her face remained as composed as ever. Before he left, he paused at the door. "You ever think you'll tell the full story?" Her hands rested on the Barrett's handle. "Maybe, but only to someone who needs to hear it." Deployment came with the smell of aviation fuel and the thrum of rotor blades. The SEALs loaded gear, checking weapons one last time under red-lit skies. The commander stood near the transport, scanning faces. He saw nerves disguised as grins, confidence masking fear. And then he saw Sarah, calm as ever, moving with the quiet rhythm that had become her signature. She climbed aboard with the Barrett, slung over her shoulder, as natural as if she were carrying a backpack. To anyone else, the weapon was a burden. To her, it was simply part of her. As the helicopter lifted off, wind roaring against the fuselage, the commander sat across from her. Their eyes met briefly. He wanted to ask again about Kandahar, about the man in her scope, about what it felt like to break history with a single trigger pull. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he thought of her words. Watch me work. Soon he would. And he suspected. The truth of Sarah Cole wouldn't come from files or whispers. It would come from the battlefield, where silence and steel spoke louder than legends. The desert air was cold that night, sharp against exposed skin. The moon was a thin sliver, casting almost no light across the rugged terrain. The helicopter dropped the SEAL team miles from their target, rotors thundering before fading into silence as it disappeared into the black sky. The commander crouched low with his men, adjusting his night vision goggles. Ahead lay their objective, a fortified compound bristling with armed sentries and surrounded by shifting winds that turned the sand into a living thing. The mission was simple on paper: extract a hostage held deep inside, but simple rarely. Survived first contact. Sarah was already gone. While the team moved toward the valley floor, she broke away, climbing higher along the northern slope. The Barrett weighed nearly 30 pounds, yet she carried it without complaint, steady and deliberate with each step. By the time the SEALs approached the compound, she was a shadow settled into position, prone against the sand, rifle resting. On a bipod, the commander's earpiece crackled softly. Her voice came through, calm and measured. 2 on the roof, east side. Patterns lazy. They're not expecting company. The commander raised a hand, signaling his men to hold. Through his own optics, he saw what she'd already called. 2 guards pacing sloppily, rifles slung rather than ready. Seconds later, a muted thump echoed across the night, then another. Both guards dropped soundlessly, their bodies folding into the rooftop. Roof's clear, Sarah's voice confirmed. No hint of triumph, just fact. The team advanced. As they approached the compound wall, another burst of static. South Tower 3 targets. Coordinated movement. They're alert. Copy, the commander whispered. Before he could give the signal, 3 shots cracked in rapid succession, echoing faintly across the ridge. Through his goggles, he saw the tower go still, the silhouettes collapsing one after another like cut strings. He exhaled slowly. She wasn't just fast, she was surgical. The team breached the outer wall, moving in pairs, rifles sweeping through shadowed corridors. The compound was alive, now shouts in Arabic, boots scrambling, doors slamming. Muzzle flashes erupted from windows, bursts of gunfire spraying into the night. The commander ducked behind cover, returning fire. One operator shouted, pinned by. A machine gun rattling from the far side of the courtyard. The weapon's arc tore into stone and sand, cutting off their movement. Got him, Sarah's voice said. A single shot rang out. The heavy machine gun went silent. The operator scrambled free, giving a quick thanks into comms. Everywhere they moved, her presence followed, an unseen hand shaping the fight. The commander realized the enemy didn't even understand what was happening. They thought they were under assault from every angle, when in truth it was a single woman on a ridge, reading the battlefield like a map only she could see. East building, second window, Sarah called. The commander shifted, spotting the muzzle flash before it. Could tear into his flank. Another shot cracked from Sarah's Barrett, and the window went dark. Clear, she said. Minutes stretched like hours. The SEALs pushed deeper, clearing room after room. The hostage was found in a locked chamber, hands bound, eyes wide with terror. They freed him quickly, checking vitals before signaling exfil. But the enemy wasn't finished. Reinforcements flooded in from the west, vehicles kicking up dust, headlights cutting through the dark. "We've got company," one operator muttered. "Correction," Sarah's voice came steady. "You had company." 3 sharp cracks split the air. Headlights shattered. Vehicles skidded to halts, their drivers slumped over. The reinforcements scattered, disoriented, easy prey for the SEALs who swept through with precision. The commander couldn't help himself. Between breaths, between orders, he listened for her voice, for the calm that cut through chaos. She never faltered, never raised her tone, never wasted a word. When the exfil bird finally arrived, rotors chopping the night, the SEALs loaded the hostage and their wounded. The commander was last aboard. He looked back toward the ridge where Sarah still lay, a silhouette against the stars. She rose slowly, Barrett slung across her shoulder, and began making her way down, each step measured even in victory. On the flight back, the men spoke in hushed tones. Some grinned, some shook their heads in disbelief. "She saved our asses," Rodriguez muttered. "Half those guys didn't even see us coming. She dropped them before they had a chance." Another leaned back, exhaling. "Never seen anything like it. Felt like we had a ghost covering us." The commander stayed silent, but his thoughts churned. He'd seen good snipers. He'd relied on them, but Sarah Cole was something else entirely. She wasn't simply protecting them, she was dictating. The battle itself, pulling threads only she could see, unraveling the enemy with patience and precision. When they landed back at base, the men filed off, adrenaline still buzzing through their veins. Sarah walked ahead of them, quiet as always, the Barrett case in hand. No swagger, no smile, no acknowledgement of what she'd done. The commander caught up to her outside the hangar. "You shaped that fight," he said. She gave him a look, eyes steady. "I did my job." "That wasn't just a job," he pressed. "You turned chaos into order. You gave us the ground before we even stepped on it." She shrugged lightly, shifting the Barrett's weight. "That's what Overwatch is. You see what others can't. You act before they know they're exposed." He wanted to push further, to force her to acknowledge the magnitude of what she'd done. But she walked past him, disappearing into the night like a shadow melting into darker shadows. The commander stood there a long moment, the sounds of the base humming around him. He'd thought he understood her after reading her file, after seeing the record etched in sterile ink. But now he realized the file had captured only numbers. What he had witnessed tonight was something numbers could never explain. Sarah Cole wasn't just a sniper. She was inevitability. The compound raid was already becoming a blur of after-action reports and logistics. Debriefs, medical checks, equipment stowed and signed off. It was the usual rhythm after any mission. For most of the SEALs, the adrenaline faded into exhaustion, and by nightfall they crashed hard, their bunks filled with the deep, dreamless sleep only warriors knew after chaos. But the commander couldn't sleep. He found himself walking the quiet corridors of the forward base, the desert wind whistling faintly through cracks in the walls. His thoughts replayed the mission in flashes, muzzle flashes from windows, the sharp crack of a Barrett on the ridge, men shouting into comms only to be answered by Sarah's cool, unwavering voice. It wasn't just her skill. It was her calmness. In the storm, she never hesitated, never faltered. And when the compound's reinforcements came barreling in, she dismantled them before fear had a chance to take root in the team's chest. Files could measure distance and dates, but not that. He turned a corner, and found her exactly where he expected, the armory. She sat alone on a wooden bench, the Barrett laid out before her in pieces, each part cleaned and polished with a precision bordering on reverence. The rest of the base was asleep, but Sarah worked quietly under the hum of a single lamp. "You don't stop, do you?" the commander asked, leaning against the doorway. She didn't look up. Rifles don't clean themselves. He stepped inside, letting the door click shut behind him. Neither do memories. That made her pause. Just briefly, her hand stilled on the barrel. Then she resumed, her motions as steady as before. "That's a dangerous line of thought, Commander." "Maybe," he said, moving closer. "But I've been in enough fights to know the look of someone carrying ghosts. I saw it tonight, even through the calm." She set down the barrel, finally meeting his eyes. "You've been digging in my file, Kandahar." He nodded slowly. The record shot, 3,267 meters. Silence stretched between them. The hum of the lamp seemed louder, the air heavier. Sarah leaned back slightly, folding her arms. "Most people bring it up like a story they heard in a bar. They want me to confirm it, brag about it, let them live in it for a minute. You're different. I need to understand it," he admitted. "Not for the story, for you." Her eyes flickered, searching his face for some hidden angle. Then she exhaled, almost a sigh. "It wasn't supposed to happen." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "The shot," she said quietly. "It wasn't planned. It wasn't part of the mission. We were covering a convoy outside Kandahar, pinned down by insurgents with technicals. RPG fire was cutting us apart. One of them, he had the launcher. He was further back, beyond what anyone thought possible. I saw him set up. I knew if he got another shot off, men would die. So I took it." Her voice had gone distant now, not emotionless but heavy, as if the words dragged weight with them. "I calculated everything: wind, temperature, Coriolised drift. I held my breath, pressed the trigger, and waited. 4 seconds later, he dropped." The commander swallowed. 4 seconds. That was how long the bullet had been in the air. Long enough to question, long enough to doubt, long enough to feel the world itself holding its breath. "You saved them," he said. Her eyes hardened. "I killed him." The words were sharp, almost bitter. People forget what that means when they talk about the distance, the record, the glory. They see numbers. I see his face every night, 2 miles away, and I still see it. The commander wanted to argue, to tell her it was justified, that she had prevented deaths. But he realized she already knew that. Logic didn't erase memory. Just because the shot was righteous didn't mean it came without cost. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he asked. She shook her head, a faint, humorless smile tugging at her lips. "You think I didn't?" The brass plastered it in reports, whispered it in briefings. "But me? I didn't want it." The record doesn't change what it felt like. And when you're 2 miles out, the debate of morality gets quieter. There's no fight, no face-to-face. Just numbers, angles, probabilities. That's the part that haunts me, the distance. How detached it felt. The commander sat down across from her, the wooden bench creaking. "That's why you don't talk about it." "That's why I don't let it define me," she corrected. "Because if I do, then I stop being a soldier and start being a story. And stories, they don't sleep." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the lamp, the faint desert wind, the smell of gun oil, it was all that filled the space. Finally, the commander leaned forward. "I watched you tonight. You weren't just killing. You were protecting. Every trigger pull was for someone else's life. That's the truth of who you are, Sarah. Not the record, not the distance. The shield you become for others." Her eyes softened, just slightly. enough to show that his words had reached her. She didn't smile, didn't cry, but she blinked once, slow, as if absorbing the weight of being seen. "Maybe," she said finally. "But shields break too." "Commander." He nodded. "Not tonight." Sarah looked back at the rifle pieces before her. She began reassembling the Barrett, her hands steady, practiced. But something in the air between them had shifted. For the first time, she had given him a fragment of her truth, and for the first time, he understood the cost behind the call. As he stood to leave, he paused at the doorway. "When this deployment's over, you should tell someone the whole story. Not for them, for you." Her hands paused on the rifle, then resumed. "Maybe," she said again. The commander left her there in the armory, the glow of the lamp casting her in silhouette. She was still a mystery, still wrapped in silence, but he'd been allowed a glimpse past the armor. Enough to know that her legend wasn't born of arrogance or luck. It was born of burden one she carried quietly, because silence was her way of surviving. And as he walked back through the sleeping base, he realized something else. He trusted her completely, not because of the record, but because of the humanity she refused to let go of, even when the world tried to make her a myth. The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of jagged rock and wind-carved valleys. It was enemy country against Afghanistan's southern spine, not far from where Sarah had made her record shot years before. The commander knew it the moment he saw the map, and though she hadn't said a word, he knew Sarah felt it too. The target was a high-value facilitator, a man coordinating arms shipments into the region. His compound sat on a ridge overlooking a valley, its walls reinforced, its defenses precise. Intelligence warned of RPG nests, heavy machine guns, and fighters moving with discipline uncommon in insurgent ranks. The plan was textbook. Insert under darkness. Reach from the low side, secure the compound, extract before reinforcements. But all plans depended on one thing: Overwatch. Sarah's role wasn't just critical. It was the hinge upon which every man's survival turned. The helicopter ride was silent, the men checking weapons with ritual precision. The commander sat opposite Sarah, watching her. She looked calm, as always, her face lit intermittently by the green glow of the cabin lights. Yet something in her stillness was different. He recognized it now, the weight of memory. When the bird dropped them into the valley, the air was biting cold. The SEALs formed up, moving toward the objective in disciplined silence. Sarah broke away, climbing the northern ridgeline. The commander watched her silhouette vanish into the darkness, Barrett slung low, her steps unhurried, as if she were returning to a place she had already known. Minutes passed like hours. The team positioned themselves near the compound wall, hearts pounding. Then her voice broke through comms, steady as ever. Eyes on. 2 rooftop sentries, pacing clockwise. 1 tower guard with NVGs. Crosswind is stiff 15 knots east to west. Adjust accordingly. The commander exhaled. The valley's winds were vicious tonight, swirling unpredictably, just like Kandahar. She'd mentioned the drift before. Now it was real, a living thing clawing at every bullet in the air. Roof sentries marked. 2 sharp cracks echoed, spaced 3 seconds apart. Both bodies dropped in unison, collapsing into shadow. Tower guard down, Sarah followed. Another muted shot, another problem erased. The SEALs breached, moving fast. Shouts erupted from inside the compound. Gunfire lit the windows, tracers streaking across the dark. The commander returned fire, signaling men forward. But the resistance was heavier than expected. Fighters poured into the courtyard, disciplined arcs of fire cutting off entry points. Pinned, the commander heard Sarah's voice again. Machine gun nest, southwest wall. I've got him. A thunderous crack. The nest went silent, enemy fighters scattering. As their cover vanished, Clear path, she said calmly. The team surged forward, climbing over debris, storming through the breach. But inside was worse. Strobe lights flashed, gunfire deafening in tight hallways. The hostage wasn't here. Intel had been wrong. Instead, they faced layers of resistance, designed to bleed them dry. The commander ducked behind a crumbling wall, bullets sparking off stone. "We're bowed down," he barked. Sarah's voice came steady. "Mark your position." He clicked twice into comms. Seconds later, a shot tore through the window opposite him, silencing the insurgent gunman. Then another, her rifle, speaking across nearly 2 miles of shifting terrain. But the wind was vicious, growing stronger. Twice he heard her fire, and twice the shots went wide, smacking into stone. She adjusted quickly, recalibrating, whispering wind speeds to herself. "Copy correction," she said softly, almost to herself. Then another shot cracked, and a rooftop gunner fell. The commander's gut clenched. This was Kandahar all over again. The distance, the wind, the stakes men's lives balanced on whether one woman could bend probability to her will. "Sarah," he said over comms, quieter now. "Talk to me." There was a pause. Then her voice, low and steady. 4 seconds. Of flight time. 15-knot drift. Elevation's good. It's just numbers. Just a problem to solve. But he heard it, the tremor beneath the calm. She wasn't just solving math. She was staring into her past, into the shot that had followed. Her every night since. Suddenly, an RPG whooshed across the courtyard, slamming into a wall. Shrapnel tore the air. One SEAL went down screaming, his leg mangled. "RPG team, 200 meters west of the compound," Sarah called out. The commander cursed. They'd never make it. The team was pinned, medics working frantically. If another rocket fired, they'd lose half their squad. "Sarah, I see him," she cut in. Her scope tracked, wind battering the valley. The gunner knelt, reloading the tube. Her finger hovered on the trigger. The memory of Kandahar pressed against her chest. The man 2 miles away. The seconds of waiting. The knowledge that she was about to decide life and death with a squeeze of her hand. "Sarah," the commander said again, softer. She inhaled. Steady. The world slowed. Wind, distance, heart rate all folded into silence. She pressed the trigger. The Barrett roared. 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds passed. The RPG gunner slumped sideways, dead before he could fire. "Target neutralized," she said. The commander closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them. Around him, his men moved again, momentum regained. Sarah's shot had broken the enemy's back. Resistance faltered, fighters retreating into shadows. Within minutes, the SEALs secured the compound, setting charges to burn what they couldn't carry. Exfil was chaos dust, gunfire, shouted orders, but the team made it out, dragging their wounded aboard the helicopter. The commander climbed in last, gripping the frame, his chest heaving. Across the cabin, Sarah sat with the Barrett across. Her lap, calm once more, but her eyes told the truth. She hadn't just killed a man tonight. She'd confronted a ghost, and for the first time, she'd won. The ride back was silent. The men were too tired, too shaken, too aware of how close it had been. But the commander's gaze never left Sarah. He thought of her words. Shields break too. Tonight, she hadn't broken. Tonight, she had carried them all. And somewhere deep inside, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, she had started to forgive herself. The helicopter landed under a faint pre-dawn sky, its rotors stirring dust and sand in slow, languid spirals. The mission was over, the enemy neutralized, the team intact. Relief hung in the air, tempered by exhaustion and the knowledge that another day in these mountains could have ended differently. The seals filed out first, dragging deer and wounded, voices quiet in the early light. The commander lingered, scanning the ridge one last time. He knew she'd followed them down. Barrett slung casually across her shoulder, calm as if nothing had happened. But he could see it in her eyes, the weight of the shots she had fired, the ghosts she carried across impossible distances. He caught up to her at the edge of the base, where the desert opened into rolling dunes and rocky plains. She stood with her back to him, staring at the horizon as though reading some unseen map etched in sand and wind. "You did it," he said. Finally, she didn't turn. "I did my job." "No," he said, stepping closer. "You did more than that. You saved lives. Every shot tonight, you didn't just pull a trigger. You carried us all." Her hands gripped the Barrett's case tighter, but she still didn't look at him. "Do you want to know what it's like?" she asked quietly. "To sit on a ridge, 2 miles from a man's life, knowing everything depends on you? To measure wind, temperature, Coriolis effect, heart rate, and weight." He nodded slowly. "Yes, I do. I need to understand." She inhaled sharply, as though drawing in every ounce of the desert around her, then let it out in a long, controlled breath. "Kandahar," she began, her voice low. It wasn't a record. It wasn't a score. It was a boy with a launcher, ready to kill men who trusted me with their lives. I had to decide, do I wait for someone else to act, or do I act? Her eyes, finally meeting his, were hard and bright with memory. 4 seconds of flight, 4 seconds of absolute certainty, and fear. One mistake, and people die. One miscalculation, and the cost is forever. I pulled the trigger, and he dropped. And I walked away, but I never really did. The commander's chest tightened. "You've carried that weight every day since." She nodded. "It follows me, even tonight in this mission." I felt him there. I had to confront it all over. Again, and I did. He studied her face, the lines of fatigue, the steadiness beneath trauma, the quiet discipline that defined her. Why hide it? Why carry it alone? "Because numbers don't explain it," she said, voice almost a whisper. "Distance, elevation, wind, those are easy to measure. The cost of the shot? The burden of knowing what a life is worth in seconds? That can't be measured. That can't be shared. Most wouldn't understand. And even if they did, they can't carry it for me." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "But you don't have to carry it alone anymore. Not here. Not with you." A faint exhale, a blink. She looked away, scanning the desert again. "I've lived my life like that," she said. "Silent, alone. Even now, I don't know if I can stop." "You can," he said firmly. "You just have to trust people. Let them see who you are beyond the legend, beyond the record, beyond the distance." Her hands rested on the Barrett, the rifle that had defined so much of her past. "It's not the rifle," she said finally. "It's the choices. Every time I take a shot, it's a life or death calculus. And every time I walk away, I carry what I couldn't prevent. That's the legacy, not the record, not the distance. The people who live because of it, the people who die, the decisions I make in silence." The commander nodded. "Then your legacy isn't the record in Kandahar. It's every life you've protected, every soldier you've saved, every mission you've turned from chaos into order." She looked at him then, really looked, for the first time without armor, without distance. A faint, almost imperceptible vulnerability softened her gaze. "Maybe," she said, voice low. "Maybe that's what it's always been." The sun broke over the horizon, bathing the desert in gold. Dust shimmered in the light, wind stirring the grains like tiny rivers. The commander noticed the way Sarah's silhouette, stood against the dawn, steady, disciplined, commanding without words. Not a myth, not a legend, a soldier. A pause. Then she shifted, lifting the Barrett case, slinging it over her shoulder with practiced ease. "We move out?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Yes, but first, know this. You've changed. More than this mission. You've changed me. You've changed everyone who watched you carry the impossible. And now, maybe it's time to let the weight ease." Her lips twitched in a half-smile, almost imperceptible. "We'll see." As the SEALs began their return to the base, the commander walked beside her. He didn't press further. She had shared enough for now. Enough to understand her past, her choices, her burdens. Kandahar was no longer a shadow she carried in isolation. It was part of her story. Yes, but not the whole story. The team loaded into the transport, the engines roaring to life. Sarah took a seat by the window, Barrett across her lap, eyes on the passing desert. The commander sat beside her, glancing at her once, twice, then letting the silence settle between them. It wasn't empty. It was understanding, respect, trust, and for the first time, he sensed she was not just a ghost of Kandahar, not just a sniper defined by a record. She was Sarah Cole, soldier, protector, human. Her legend was complete, not in numbers, not in myth, but in quiet, lethal precision, and in the lives she had saved. As the helicopter lifted off, casting shadows across the dunes, the commander thought of her words again. The people who live because of it. The decisions I make in silence. Tonight, she had given him more than answers. She had given him insight into courage, discipline, and the unbearable weight of responsibility. He understood now that legends weren't always celebrated, weren't always spoken of. Some were carried quietly, in silence, in action, in the lives touched and protected. And Sarah Cole would always be one of them. The helicopter disappeared into the distance, carrying the SEALs back to base. Below, the desert stretched endlessly, yet it no longer felt empty. Somewhere out there, a sniper's legacy had become real, human, and unforgettable, not because of distance, but because of the life she had lived in every choice, every shot, every quiet moment of courage. And for the first time in years, Sarah allowed herself to feel it, the weight of her past easing slightly, the burden of silence lifted, the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had not just survived history, but had shaped it. The commander watched her, knowing the story would stay with him forever. Not the record, not the legend, the soldier, the human, the protector. And in that truth, he found clarity.